When I was growing up, I took, when I was in like early middle school, we started taking a science class, and they were, I remember when we were growing up, we would learn about like scientists doing really cool stuff. And I actually came across a couple of like fascinating things, but one of the things that we read about was like, I think it was like a geology class or something like that. We were studying all these sorts of things, and they were talking about the way that things were growing. And then not too long, I mean, I guess a few years after that, I got really interested in it. So I like took a deep dive in that world. And then a few years ago, I actually read about a project that happened. Some of you might be familiar with this. Have you ever heard of like Biosphere 2? Have you ever heard about this? One of the most fascinating things to me. Biosphere 2 is one of these things, and I was like, if I was going to do something other than this, at least for a season, I think it would be so fascinating to be a part of this. But essentially what happened, and actually I will show you a picture of this. Now, what they did is they began with the question, and the question was, could we take everything kind of going on in our natural world and put it inside, like get it indoors, and then let things grow from here, right? So this happened in Oracle, Arizona. A group of scientists, a large group of scientists came together to figure out, could we create sort of like a whole ecosystem on the inside of this facility? And that's what they started working on. And so over the years, they started working on this, which became one of the most fascinating things. Now, if you can imagine this, within this sort of like segment of Biosphere 2, right? They created all sorts of different types of like things that were going outdoors. So you had like a desert sort of area. They even tried to recreate like an ocean area. They tried to recreate a rainforest, and it became fascinating. Now, if we go to the next one, this became so interesting to me. They started sort of growing things like trees specifically in this, and they begin to go, hey, what does it take to recreate like what's going on out here in here, right? It became one of the most fascinating things. And they were able to do it. Like what's so interesting is they began to grow things, and they would grow, and what they also found is, which was really fascinating, when it came to trees in particular, and this is so interesting, they actually grew faster indoors. And they were trying to study like what was it that's causing them to grow quickly. And so they began to grow, these trees began to grow, and then something fascinating began to happen. As they began to mature, the trees that they were able to grow in like this rainforest section on the indoors, right? They would mature and grow, but they would only grow to a certain point before they would start falling over. And some of you have seen this, or maybe you read about this in science class. It's so fascinating. They begin to like fall over. They didn't have roots deep enough to hold them up as they matured quickly. And what they were gonna go is like, well, what causes this? And there's all sorts of causes to it. I mean, you looked at the soil, they would look at how things were growing, all these sorts of things. But in the midst of it, one of the key findings that was so fascinating is they found that one of the key components that they were missing wasn't just in the soil, wasn't just in how they were growing it, and wasn't just in sort of the ecosystem they had created. What they were missing was wind, and a consistent wind over the life of these trees as they were growing that would cause a level of tension that caused them to sort of have resistance as it grew. And what they found is as they sort of like would grab the resistance on the way up, this is so fascinating, as they were maturing, as they were growing, the resistance actually was one of the things that caused them to grow deeper roots and be able to mature in a better way. Now, this is why it's so fascinating, this is so interesting. When you look at this, what they discovered was really simple, and one of the things, not the only thing, one of the things was this, that no wind meant no resistance, and no resistance meant no strength for the tree. And I tell you this is actually what we talked about for the vast majority of our time last week, is this, that the resistance that most of us feel over time is not something that we would invite. For most of it's not something that we want. The storms that we experience in our lives, the difficulty, aren't things that we really would wish on either other people, but they happen to many of us. And sometimes it happens because of our own doing. Like sometimes you do something, let's be honest, you've done something that caused something that you didn't want to happen in your life, and that was just sort of like, you can see the causation of it, you see how that works. For many people, and this happens too in your life, other people do things, and all of a sudden it begins to affect you, and their decisions cause storms in your life that you didn't invite and you didn't choose, but nonetheless, they exist, right? Some of you, this happened to you when you were growing up. Like you grew up and you ended up growing up in a single parent home because of decisions that somebody else made. And you go like, oh, like I struggle with this. This is part of my story. I grew up in a single parent home. I was super close to my mom. I was never close to my dad. And we'd go out, it's like baseball season, so I'm like in baseball mode, I'm thinking about this, but I'd go out, and one of the biggest questions I would have, and one of the things that I was frustrated at God about from the time I was a little kid, is like, it seems like every other kid had a dad to play catch with. And my mom tried really hard, but that was just not her thing. You know what I'm talking about? Like she would come out, this is like 80s and 90s, with the big old poofy hair and like a fitted hat on top, and she would pitch to me. So we were doing this, and I'll never forget, like one time I hit it straight back at her, and I hit her in the neck, and I heard her say words that I didn't even know existed yet. It was kind of fun. And then she was like, that's the last time we're doing that. And I remember looking around going, oh my goodness, like it seems like everybody else has something that I don't. And I didn't choose that, right? I didn't invite that in. And I had all these questions, like from the time that I was a kid, even like into adulthood, like, well, God, if you could remove that, why didn't you? And that wasn't even my fault. That was just something that happened, because sometimes life sort of happens. You experience this when it comes to your job, like storms that you like experienced but didn't even invite. Like you had a bad boss and something happened in the working relationship, and you got let go, or the company did layoffs, and all of a sudden their decision-making or the things that were going on, maybe even outside of their control, affected your life significantly. For some of you, it's like a health thing pops up, and everything, you know this, when you're going through your life, everything, all the concerns that you have, all the worries that you have, you carry with you until the health thing happens, until that one doctor's appointment, and then all of a sudden, everything in your life becomes about the conversation that you just had with your doctor. And it's something that you didn't invite, it's just something that happened. And then truthfully, sometimes it's a combination of both, right? Things that you did, things that you didn't really control, but there are things that just happen because you're human and it's your life. And what we said last week, and this is where we're gonna pick up today, we said that what God does in the redemptive process that's described in the New Testament, what Jesus teaches about over and over again is this, that God often uses like the storms in our life to transform us. That whether you invited it or not, whether you wanted it to happen or not, like these storms happen and they show up, and the beautiful part and the redemptive part of what Jesus does isn't that he promises to remove all of that in our lives, but he promises to be present in it and give us the strength for those moments. So that's where we left off last week. So I'll tell you what we're gonna do today. I had like, just to be honest, I had like 5 different variations of things that I wanna talk about today. And the thing that I couldn't like escape or like couldn't kind of get rid of was this idea that some of the storms in your life that you experience either younger, maybe you're in right now, maybe you don't even know it, but soon it's gonna be coming, affects the things that we have when it comes to like our dreams for the future, right? And nobody chooses this part either, but like when you're a kid, you have certain dreams about the future. Like maybe you were gonna be an NBA player, but you were 5'8" and it just wasn't gonna happen for you. You know what I mean? Like you didn't control that, but that's just how that works, you know? But some of us, you have dreams for the future when it comes to like family, or you have dreams for the future when it comes to relationships, or even like your close friendships, or your career, those kinds of things. And somewhere along the way, and this is part of being an adult and growing up, you know this, there are certain dreams in your life that you experience that at some point along the way, it seems like that's not gonna happen for you. And what's hard about this is you hear some people talk about this and you go like, if you just had enough faith and it would have happened, but then you had faith and it didn't. For some people, you're like, hey, like I had a dream for this friendship or this marriage or this, relationship that I had or this job or how like you had whatever those dreams were. And whatever happened to you feels like there's no more ellipses on that sentence. It's like a period and it's like it ended and it's done. And what you're left with, and this is what the difficult part of this is, you're left looking around going like, what do I do now? Like how do I move forward when it comes to dreams that feel like they die? And what do I do? Or when your life like changes so much and you didn't want it to change and then it just changed and you looked around and you go, I don't really know where to go from here. And you don't say this out loud. This is always kind of fun. Maybe you've never heard a pastor say this before. But you hear songs like Goodness of God, the stuff that we sing, and you love that other people love it, but you're low-key mad the whole time because you're just not sure that that's true or it doesn't feel true to you. Or like you did this, like for somewhere along the way, like you experienced something and you go like, and I say this all the time, if a good God could, then a good God should have removed this or protected me from it or shielded me from it or done something different here because I had a dream for the future and it feels like it's no longer there. And so what we're gonna do for the next few minutes, I'll tell you what we're gonna do. We started looking at a guy named Paul last week. We're gonna look at part of his story today. And I'll tell you, we're not gonna fully and finally solve it. So I'll tell you where we're gonna go for the next few minutes. We're not gonna fully and finally solve it because it's not fully and finally solvable in this way. But we're going to look at his story, and in the midst of his story, we're going to see some principles that I think really help us as we navigate through this. So Paul is an interesting guy. He wrote about half the New Testament. If you're unfamiliar with the New Testament, about half of it's written to like local churches that he helped plant all over the ancient world. And the vast majority of his writing is please stop being stupid, and here's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Like that's a lot of his writing. Like here's what that is not going to be, and here's what you could be. Like there's a lot of Paul's writings that are like this. Now, but his story is interesting. I was given a book early on that I read, and it was so fascinating to see the other side of not the New Testament writer Paul who planted all the churches, but the guy who was doing things before he came to faith. And what's fascinating is he would have had some of the best education. He would have likely spoke multiple languages. He would have studied under a very famous rabbi during the time. He had all of these, this is fascinating, would have had all of these ambitions towards like this professional religious leadership connected to two very distinct people, and we'll talk about this, or two very distinct groups, Sadducees and the Pharisees, who were both equally religious in their approach, equally wrong in their approach, and had a whole lot of power in the ancient world. And with these two ancient religious sort of groups, he would have had sort of influence. In fact, when he meets Jesus, one of the most fascinating things, he has this like radical sort of beyond natural story where Jesus appears to him and his whole life gets redirected. But he's on an assignment from one of these religious groups to go do something. So on the way, from this like religious leader's perspective, he's on the way to do something. Jesus shows up in a miraculous way and everything changes for him, right? Now, after he experienced this sort of thing with Jesus, what happens is he has this, you sort of see these like glimpses of it through the New Testament in his writings. He has this vision to go back to these, groups of people where sort of the epicenter of all this is and share what's been going on and almost redirect and talk about what could and should be. And it's not a bad thing. And this is what's interesting about it. His aspirations for what could and should be were actually good things. And at the end of the day, we're going to look through the text, and it's so fascinating. He's going to go and show up and share to both of these sort of people groups. And it's going to go so horribly wrong and so horribly bad that as you read through the text, there's almost like humorous, like it goes so bad. Like it was almost like your first date. It was so bad, like it could not have gone worse. And then all of a sudden, there's a shift in all of it, right? And so we're going to pick up, this is a fascinating sort of thing. So Paul shows up to a meeting with both of these people groups. This is Acts chapter 23. We're going to read you through the text. And if you've never read this before, again, it's one of my favorite passages in the New Testament. So Paul looks straight at the Sanhedrin. If you're not familiar with Sanhedrin, it's kind of both of these groups, Pharisees, Sadducees together, all these very educated religious leaders sort of in the group, in the camp together. And he says this, he looks at all of it, he says, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day." So he goes, hey, I was going this direction. I've experienced something new. He's talking to them. And then he goes on and he says this. It's so fun. He says, so at this, the high priest, Ananias, so like he's like the top dog, Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him in the mouth. He got backslapped, right? So this is what's fascinating. Now, I don't know if you've ever said something to your boss where they backslapped you, but that's a great HR thing. You would be rich right now. But this is what happened. He stands up in front of everybody. Now get this. He gets hit in the face. This isn't like this didn't go well. This went so poorly that the point leader of the whole thing goes, well, you got to smack him. Or more realistically, they probably would have punched him in the mouth. Like this is what we're looking at. And Paul, again, it's so fascinating, has this dream to go back and share all this stuff. He's seen miraculous things already. And he ends up going and launching the church in all the ancient world for people who were specifically not Jews. Like all of these things are fascinating. But he goes back to this people group and so frustrated out the gate, they just slug him. And then what happens next is so interesting. I love what happens. It goes on, it says this. It says, so then Paul says to them, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, which is like your mama. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit like, it gets real nasty quick. Which is not like, this is not like you whitewashed wall. Like this is like, he's getting after it. He's low-key mad, which you would be too. Somebody just decked you. He says, so you sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck. Which is a good way of saying like, what? You claim all this religious authority. You claim all of these things, and yet you can't even control your emotions when I'm just pointing to what I feel like is true. You had this guy strike me. Now, if it were me, I'd be like, why didn't you strike me, Ananias? Let's go. You got a little bit of this. Where's Anna? There you go. I did the thing. You got Karate Kid on this, right? But then what happens next is so interesting. And it's one of these things that you can quickly miss as you read the story. But he ends up saying all of this in just somewhat anger. And then he pivots and he drops this bomb that's going to cause both of them to argue. He says this, he goes on and he says, those who were standing near Paul said, how dare you insult the high priest? Ooh. Then he goes on and says this, Paul replied, brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, do not speak evil about the ruler of your people, which I love this. Again, people don't talk about this enough. Paul goes, yep, my bad. I get the authority thing. He comes back under it. And then he goes in, and this is one of those so fascinating things about the New Testament. He goes in and then just drops this thing and watches. He goes on and says this, then Paul, knowing that some of the Sadducees and the other Pharisees called out in the Sanhedrin, my brothers, I'm a Pharisee, descended from the Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead. Now again, you can read this so quickly and be like, well, of course, if you follow Jesus, believe in the resurrection, sort of thing. What's fascinating though about this, and he knew this, is one group believed in this way and then one group didn't. And there was a stark contrast between the two. It's not a one-to-one, but it's kind of like making a political reference when you know that half the room is divided. And you want to do this at Thanksgiving, just for fun. Anybody else do this? You just say the one thing about something, and then you just kind of step back and go, you kind of watch. And then that crazy uncle gets kind of nuts, and then this crazy uncle gets kind of nuts, and then they're both shirtless fighting at the end. This is South Carolina. I don't know what it works in Ohio, but and they're just going at it, and you're just kind of watching yeah. Or it's you get on what's the app for your neighborhood? You know what I'm talking about? What's the neighborhood app? You ever done this before? What's it called? Nextdoor? You ever gone on a Nextdoor app and you watch people argue about stuff and you're like, I'm just going to watch it. John Chris had this funny thing where he's I just get in there with a different account where nobody knows it's me and I just drop something and watch the comments flow. That's a little bit of what's going on here. And he's he brings about this thing where it's the truth of it is where he's going, the resurrection, and he's also knowing this is so divided. But he realizes in this moment, this is what's so fascinating, that what he came to do, the dream that he came to sort of play out, wasn't going to work because of the hostility that already exists between the two. And the emotional part about this, and this is kind of hard, is going it wasn't going to happen the way that he envisioned it. Which you know that. You've had family sort of things where you go I envision this going one way. You practice the conversation. How many of you ever done that? You ever practice the conversation beforehand and then you go have it and it goes horribly wrong? Have you ever done this? And you go, I thought it was going to go so much better, and then it just doesn't. And it's in that moment, and you know this, whatever it is, it just feels like it dies. The vision that you had, the dream that you had, it just feels like it drops and it's dead. And he goes on and it says this, verse 7. So when he says this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The assembly was divided. The Sadducees say that there is no resurrection and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees believe in all of these things. There's a group that believes in beyond natural things. There's a group that would say that they didn't believe in these kind of beyond natural things. And then it goes on and it says this, verse 9, there was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. We find nothing wrong with this man, they said. What if a spirit or angel has spoken to him? They go, wait. One group's hey, maybe he's right. The other group's no. It's fun. And then it goes on and it says this. The dispute became so violent. These are religious leaders. It became so violent that the commander was afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them. Right? This really is the Nextdoor app. You know what I mean? It is that thing. It'd be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him to the barracks. Now again, some of you haven't read the New Testament before and you're man, that's Game of Thrones kind of stuff. It is great. It could be an HBO show. It's fascinating. They are so afraid for what's about to happen to Paul. They remove him from the whole context. Now this is what's interesting. You can read this so fast and miss. What Paul most wanted, though, wasn't the dispute. He wanted to go and share the gospel. His dream to go back and share the gospel and to bring them together. But that is not at all what happened. In fact, he ends up, this was so fascinating, he ends up alone, right? He ends up alone. You ever had this before? Like, again, you know. You thought it was going to go so much better, and then it didn't, and then it died, and then you're just alone in your thoughts going, well, what do I do now? I have a friend that launched a business like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it got off the ground and did really, really well for about 2 years, and then it just felt like it peaked, and then it just quickly died. And as fast as it was here, it was gone. And I was talking about it one day, and I was like, what was that like? And they said this is the most fascinating. They said the hardest part of it was the isolation and feeling like you're alone immediately after it failed. And it's so interesting. Paul's story in this is so interesting. He's removed from all of it and pulled away into isolation. And what you know about isolation, what I know about isolation is this. Isolation always does this to us. It always amplifies our fear and diminishes our capacity to see what could happen. It eliminates your visual options for what could be in the future and puts like a stamp on an ending for it. Which is so interesting. Like, I get on Twitter, or what is it, X now? Yeah. And I'll read all these like articles. I love business articles. I love entrepreneurial stuff. And you'll see this. You'll see guys that you read oftentimes that are entrepreneurs. And at the end of a lot of these like thread posts, I don't know if you've ever seen like these threads, I will read them and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's good. And at the core of it though, is somebody who's reaching out to be seen into a digital community that can come alongside of them and help breathe life into something that's going on. And you know what that's like. There's nothing quite like feeling uncertainty and struggle and pain and then being around somebody, not in isolation, but in a community who goes, like, breathes into you. And so Paul is in the barracks. He's isolated from all this. The next part of this becomes so fascinating in the text. It says this. It says, the following night, the Lord stood near Paul, which again, one of these beyond natural things. And the original language around this, specifically in Greek, talks about taking courage. So it shows up in a supernatural, beyond natural way. And the phrase is, take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. Now again, quick reading of this, it's so easy to pass what's actually happening here, but what happens is he goes to Jerusalem to help unite this group of people like where he was like had roots. And he goes and it does not go well. And so you have this moment where the Spirit comes to him and says, take courage. What's happening next, and this is interesting, is bigger than what you had already imagined to be. And it's different than what you imagined it to be. Now the take courage thing is interesting, and this is where I would say like, I don't know how to say this. I always view courage as like the kid who's crawling up the monkey bars with ignorance. Do you know what I'm talking about? You ever seen this? Like we have 3 and they're all very different. One of our kids, like as they climb, they look down every time and thinks about each step, right? One of our kids goes up so fast, doesn't even know they're climbing or they're high. And she's been doing it since she was 3. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like she just goes and then she's up there and she goes, oh wow, this is high. Help. You know, that's a little bit of that, right? Just, you almost imagine courage that way, you know? Or sometimes you imagine courage like this, like you muster up the thing to go do the hard thing. Like you think about it hard enough and you go, I'm gonna go do it now, and then you go. But taking courage is interesting, and the language around this is so fascinating. It's not that you muster it up, but in the text, it's almost like you access what's already yours. It's the idea that you take something that's already presented to you and given to you, and you grab hold of it, and then you go, right? And if you don't, and here's what you know, for many of us, me included, if I don't reach out and take the courage that's already accessible to me, what ends up happening is something ends up taking my heart instead, right? A friend of mine says it this way, like, if you don't like take the courage, you have to do it before fear takes you, right? Like you have to take what's accessible to you when it comes to courage before the fear takes you. And if I could say this like really bluntly, I'd say this. Some of us in the room, often many different seasons of my life, where I'd go, I missed an opportunity. I let the pitch go by simply because I just didn't take courage fast enough and trust quick enough to move forward with what I felt like God was calling me to do. And until you do, until you go, I'm not just like mustering it up. I'm not creating it myself. I am taking something that's already accessible to me because of who God is and what he's done. Then you begin to move in ways that feel like they're beyond natural to you because they are beyond natural to you. This is the business owner that you never thought was going to be a business owner, and all of a sudden they go out and they do extraordinary things. This is the introvert who goes out and they're like, you know what, I don't know. And then they go do this thing where it feels like they connect with so many people. How did you do that? Like, this is the dad that becomes a father but didn't have a father to look to when they were growing up, and they step out in courage to do things that they don't even fully know, but they're going for those things. These are the kinds of moments that go like, it's built around taking courage to step, not waiting for it to come. There's this great quote that I love. I came across this several years ago. It's by G.K. Chesterton. And I'll show you this. Here's what he says. He says, courage is almost always a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live taking the form of a readiness to die. He says, alone of all creeds, Christianity has added courage to the virtues of the Creator. And then he goes on, he says one of my favorite lines. He says it this way. He says, for the only courage worth calling courage must necessarily mean, don't miss this, that the soul passes a breaking point and does not break. He must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water and yet drink death like wine. People don't talk like that anymore, right? It's somewhere along this, the soul passes a breaking point and doesn't break. And here's what I'm tell you. Some of you, if you're really honest, either because of your previous life circumstance, current pain that you feel, simply the uncertainty of stepping forward, the truth of the matter is you've never allowed yourself to get beyond whatever the breaking point is and see what's on the other side of it because you're afraid to move. Or even probably more true for most of us, is it just didn't go the way you thought it would. And so somewhere along the way, you didn't stop, you just pressed pause about moving forward. This is true in every area of your life. This is true of marriage. Like you get past like 5 to 7 minutes of marriage and you go, somewhere along the way, there's a kind of tension that feels like it grew somewhere. Some of you hit like a really difficult part of your life and you go like, what do I do here? And it feels like a breaking point. And then it broke and you go like, I don't know what to do now. You don't even know what's on the other side of it because you paused and you backed up so far away to go, are we even gonna fix it, you know? Some of you in your career, this is what's really hard. You were labeled something early. You were labeled something early and you don't feel like it's true. If you're really honest, you just have never taken the courage to step beyond what the label said of you. And you feel stuck. And it's not that you have a bad life, you have a good life, but you've never stepped into what you feel like God has called you to do. You've never stepped beyond whatever the broken dream thing was to see what's on the other side of that breaking point to move forward and go, what is this thing now? And I'll just tell you, what's so fascinating about the New Testament and what's so fascinating about the way that Christianity spread, what's so fascinating about Jesus' teaching is all of it existed on the other side of breaking points with very, average people that moved beyond it and experienced something beautiful and extraordinary, powerful on the other side. Right. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you this. 1 Thessalonians 4, this is Paul teaching out to another group, and it says this. It says, therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. And then he says this, and we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. He said this, encourage the disheartened, help the weak, and be patient with everyone. In the midst of the courage part, I would say this, I do deeply believe that it's a communal effort. You don't muster this up on your own and then move forward. There's a component of this that is actually you connected to other people who like breathe life into this thing for you. And you know these two words, I love showing this, but defining it just so you can kind of see it, it's at least helpful for me. But you know the word, this one, you know this, discourage is something that's very specific. And you know this? Some of you would say this about yourself, or you said this in a season of your life. The prefix, right, means to be deprived or kept from, dragged away from, or excluded from courage. And this is the visual that I wish I could get you to just take is this. You exist here, courage is accessible to you here. And in the moments of you being discouraged, either your circumstances, maybe certain relationships that you have that are pulling you away, or a lack of relationships that are pulling you in the right direction, don't miss this. What it does is it takes you away from the visual of being able to grab the courage that's accessible to you. And discouragement at its core is something or someone or some situation that's pulling you away from being able to see what's actually in front of you. And then the antithesis of this side, and you know this too, this is like to encourage, and this is, again, fascinating to me at least. This prefix means to surround or to cover with or to strengthen in the face of, right? Meaning this, that until you have people around you that are breathing that kind of life into you, it is very hard to take the courage on your own. You need someone or some group of people who could come alongside of you and allow you to experience what's already yours. I put in my notes and you know this already. Courage is contagious. It's absolutely contagious. When you're around people who do courageous things, you tend to do more courageous things. But so is fear. Fear is also wildly contagious in your life. Which again, you don't say this out loud to your friend group, your relationships, but you know this. There are some people that are in your inner circle that don't need to be in your inner circle for this season because of where you are. Because you need people breathing life and helping you take the courage that's accessible to you. If you're going, hey, like I have this thing and it sits in the back of my brain and it's like 20% of my CPU power, but I've never actually taken a step towards it. And then you recognize that there's little bits of this that kind of show up where it's almost like they're pulling you away. You go, no, those are the relationships I need. Who are the people that are going to breathe in to the direction that you're going to? Now, I'm going to wrap up in just a second, but I want to tell you a quick story and then we'll end in a minute. Many of you have heard me tell stories about my mom, which is fun. I feel like a mama's boy every time I talk about this stuff. And then I feel like I hand you my man card, but I watch Braveheart a lot, so it's great. But I'll tell you, that was a joke. That was funnier than you gave me credit for, I thought. Yeah, anyway. But my mom was interesting. I actually got a front row seat to this entire message through her. So I told you earlier, I grew up in a single parent home. And my mom, what she did early on is she had a very specific vision for what she wanted to do when she had a kid. And she was not planning for me. I was very much a surprise in the most negative way possible. And there I was. She had been teaching people how to play piano and had like this small, fairly small piano thing. She would teach lessons and she would play at churches and she would travel along and do this sort of stuff. And then when she found out she was pregnant, one of the things that was fascinating about the journey of her pregnancy was I was born in the 80s, and I think we've come a ways since the 80s. But everything said that I had significant developmental sort of issues. And people had often told her, like, hey, you're a single mom, you're not going to be able to do this. They would often encourage her to abort the pregnancy at that time. And she was like, no. And there was one point towards the end of her pregnancy. This is fascinating. So I grew up charismatic Pentecostal. If you didn't, this might feel a little odd to you. But I would say I grew up, and they literally told her at one point there was no heartbeat. And this is 8 months in, right? And that I had died in the womb. And to which my mom said, hopefully if there's kids in the room, forgive me for this, but this was the quote. She goes, hell no. And then she gathers all of her church friends together. And they laid hands on her, which is the most fascinating thing. And then they prayed. And 3 days later, this sounds like such a preacher story, but this is how all of them talk about it. They've talked to me about it over the years. And then later, I had a heartbeat, and I was in there. And it was so fascinating. In the midst of all of this, here's what she decided to do. She said, hey, I know that the vision for my future is to be a mom first, right? And then she has all these aspirations around her business, and she was very entrepreneurial. And so when you hear her talk about the story, it's so interesting because the way that she talks about it is this. She goes, all of the dreams that I had for my future felt like they died when I found out I was pregnant. I was pregnant at 39. And then beyond that, I never could figure out what I was going to do next. And what she describes after that for the next 3 years is this up and down and hardship and pain. We moved 27 times when I was growing up, right? It was all sorts of these versions of this like struggle and pain. And then what happened that was so interesting, right? She would describe it like this. She described it to me years later. She said this. She said, at some point I just had to decide that God had good things for me and that I could trust him in the faith steps that I was going to take and believe that he would show up. And then if you hear her talk about this, again, it's so fascinating. She would say this. She goes, and it never felt like a linear path. And I never saw more than 1 or 2 steps ahead. And in the midst of this, and then I wish she could be up here and tell this story. It's so much more powerful. She always gets emotional. She says this part. She goes, but he was always so faithful in every courageous step. And here's what that did for me, being a kid, right? Is I watched her do things that other people never would take, or often would never take steps to do. I watched her do things wildly out of her comfort zone. I watched her build something and lose something and then build something again. I watched resiliency, but in the midst of all that, it was not her strength, it was faith. And so I'll tell you this, I was like, as I got older, and I heard, you hear more and more of it as you get older. One of the things that she would always describe is this. She goes, I had all sorts of fear throughout the entire process. She said, somebody gave me a statement that I heard early on, and I grew up with this kind of growing up. And the statement was this: we have no idea what hangs in the balance of our decision, right, to choose courage over fear. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of your decision to really take courage rather than allow yourself to take whatever the fear thing is. And the other side of this that's also very, very true, and that's this, and we talked about this last week. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of you intentionally choosing to be an encourager to other people who are in the process of figuring out which one of those they're going to take. And so I'll tell you this, and there's no like massive, sort of ending. The clarity that I wish you could have is this. Some of you have had dreams that felt like they were broken and you're not sure what to do next. And the truth of the matter is you're not going to get a ton of clarity until you just take the next right step. And the next right step for most people feels very unsettling and uncertain. And that's where you have to trust God. For many of us, you go like, hey, I believe in Christianity as a way of life, which is great. And I will practice the principles of Christianity, which is great, highly recommend, big old fan of that. And also, you also have to be able to hear the voice of God in your life to know where he's leading you. Which means this, and I would say this as clearly as I could possibly say this to you. Being a good person does not illuminate what God is telling you to do only. That's not how that works. You have to carve out intentional space to go, God, what do you want for me? And the older that you get and the more self-sufficient you get, the less and less we pause and go, God, what is obedience to what you're saying now actually look like in my life? So here's what I tell you to do. And this is a really honest thing. And again, I think I've told you this before. When we moved here, I knew that this is what I preach on about 60% of the time, some version of this, saying, you are a good person, and you're such a great person. Yay, you. And you're talented, and you're gifted, and you're self-sufficient. Absolutely. Woo, all those things. And also, how do we pull apart that to the point where you go, God, more than anything else, I want to obey what you want me to do. And this is what I'd say. Some of you, if you're really going to ask that question, God's going to call you to do something that's wildly uncomfortable in this season of your life. God's going to ask you to step out and do things that feel uncomfortable. God's going to ask you to reconcile with people that you really don't want to reconcile with. God's going to call you to start things that you're not currently equipped for yet. God's going to call you to forgive people that don't deserve forgiveness and that you don't want to forgive. God's going to call you, and notice this, to do things that you go, when I look out, it just feels like uncertainty. And that's great. And until you feel that consistently, let's be really honest with you, you are likely living your life in some version of your own self-sufficiency and your own strength. God is calling you to do something. Now, I talked about Paul. This is where we're going to wrap up. The great ending to that story would be that then Paul goes to Rome and then he becomes like a Billy Graham. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then all the crowds, and then he was, famous, and they made a statue. Look at the statue of Paul. And then all the people in the Sanhedrin go back and say, well, Paul was right the whole time. And look how pretty the Paul, yeah. Like that. And that's not what happens. In fact, what happens next in the original language, you get these hints of it along the way, is he goes and he does what God calls him to do. And then his life ends at the end of that story. And this is one of the most fascinating things I think about Christianity. This is what G.K. Chesterton was poking at, and that's this. Somewhere around your breaking point in your life, whatever that is, and on the other side of that is where faith and courage actually live. And the end of the story is likely not going to be everything that you hoped and dreamed of for that. And at the end of the story, if you live it in obedience, you'll live your life in such a way where not even death feels like it overcomes you. Because my life was never mine to begin with. That when you come to faith, some of you, I prayed a prayer when I was 6, and there was like a flannel graph, which I'm pro flannel graph. I'm not, dunking on that. I'm a little bit dunking on that, but not a lot. We come away since then. But I'd say you gave your life to Christ, and then you started following a way of teaching to be a good person. That's great. It's just not Christianity. Christianity is you trusting the death and resurrection of Jesus to be your Savior, and then saying, and here's all of my life. Use me how you want to use me. So here's how we're going to wrap up our time. All right, I'm going to ask you if you would. There's not going to be anything massively big of this, but I'd love for you to do this. I'd love for you to close your eyes for a second, bow your head, just to give us a moment where we can pause. There's nothing special about that other than just pausing to reflect. And that's this. The question that I'm going to ask you to reflect on just for a second is actually a fairly simple one for some of you, and that's this. Some of you prayed a prayer and you would say that you're a Christian, but if you're really, really honest, you'd go, but I've never actually given my life to Jesus, in the sense of saying, I want to obey wherever it is that you send me. And so I'm going to ask you if you're going, hey, or maybe I did that and then, I got in my 20s or my 30s or my 40s and there was so much pain that I just stopped asking or stopped being obedient or stopped even caring. I was just apathetic to that. What I'd love for you to do, if that's you, I'd love for you just to pause for a second. And if God's moving on your heart to go no, Jesus, I want to give you my life. I want to give you my time. I want to give you my resources. I want to give you my family. I want to give you the fullness of me, open-handedly saying, take all of me. I want to be obedient to you. So if that's you, maybe for some of you, you're going hey, I need to pause and commit my life to Jesus. I'd love for you to pray that prayer. God, I commit the fullness of my life to wherever it is that you lead. And then the next thing is just very, very practical. And that's this. Some of you know what obedience looks like, and you're just choosing disobedience for some reason. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's past pain. Maybe it's the uncertainty of what's next. You've just decided maybe you feel like there's been broken dreams in the past, and you don't know what faithfulness looks like in the future. All of it. And you've put it on pause, or you've stopped dreaming for what God could do through you. And you know this, you're but it's time to re-engage. And so here's the question that I'd love for you just to take a second to think about, and that's this. Is there anywhere in your life where you're currently being disobedient to what you know that God is leading you towards? Is there a relationship where you're being disobedient because you haven't forgiven them? Is there a vision for a business or a nonprofit or something to start where you feel inadequate and you just haven't done it because you don't know if he's going to be faithful to do the beyond you stuff in the midst of it? And you're being disobedient by being paused and not moving forward. Or some of you, when it comes to your family stuff, you're going like, we're not engaging in the way that we need to in our family because you feel like you've hit a wall. Maybe that's the space for you. Where is God calling you to be obedient, and where are you currently being disobedient? And this is the thing that I'd love for you to do. It's fun for every adult to say these words. The repentance part of this just says, God, I am sorry for being disobedient. I think you start there and repent. God, I'm sorry for being disobedient in these things. And then I'm going to ask you to do this, and this is where we're going to wrap up. I'm going to ask you to choose, starting today when you leave, to take a step in obedience in whatever that stuff is. So, Father, we just ask, first off, that you would help heal the parts that feel broken, the broken dreams that some of us have carried, the things that will never be the way that they thought they should be, or they just don't feel like they can be that way anymore. God, I pray that you would help us to heal in that. In the midst of us, help us to trust you. God, in the same ways that you showed up for Paul thousands of years ago, but you've shown up like that with people over the course of history and redirected and moved and spoken to them to do other things. So, Father, I pray that you would help us just to pause long enough to ask you, what does obedience look like? I pray for the person who's here and they wouldn't say it this way, but maybe they would say that they're a Christian, but at the end of the day, they hold so tightly to all of the things of their own life, and their own self-sufficiency, and their own sort of way of being, and they don't come to you open-handed and say, God, you get all of it. God, I pray that you would help them to come open-handed and say, you get all of me, and that you would guide and direct them. And the last thing I pray is that you would just give us the people around us to encourage us towards taking the courage that we already have access to. And in the midst of that, over time, you would do extraordinary things to the people in this room. Things that point to you, things that only could be done through you. And God, we pray that through those things, you would bring other people back to yourself. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.